Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Melissa Giblin. I am Director of North Carolina Center for the Book here at North Carolina Humanities, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's North Carolina Reads Book Club discussion of the Violin Conspiracy with Brendan Slocumb and Dr. Marcus Pyle. Excuse me. This is the fourth book discussion of our 2024 North Carolina Reads series, and we are so glad you are here with us this evening. We started North Carolina Reads in 2022 because at North Carolina Humanities, we believe in the power of books, reading, and stories. Now in its third year, North Carolina Reads features 5 books that explore issues of racial, social, and gender equity and the history and culture of North Carolina. We want to thank the individuals and communities across North Carolina whose enthusiasm for and participation in North Carolina Reads have helped the program grow and made North Carolina Reads a national award-winning program. We hope that tonight you feel connected with our guest speakers and each other and are inspired to think about and empathize with the stories and experiences of others. Thank you again for being here this evening. As a nonpartisan statewide nonprofit and as North Carolina's affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, our mission at NC Humanities is to connect North Carolinians with cultural experiences that spur dialogue, deepen human connections, and inspire community. This evening features a moderated discussion on the Violin Conspiracy, which is our 2024 North Carolina Reads selection for May. As a note about this evening's program, North Carolina Reads books are intended for readers 18 and over, and this program contains content that may be sensitive to some. We would like to acknowledge the National Endowment for the Humanities, the State Library of North Carolina, and McGuire Woods for their sponsorship support of this year's program. Please note, any views, findings, conclusions, opinions, or recommendations expressed by our partners and participants do not necessarily represent those of NC Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. Before we begin, we will briefly discuss a few housekeeping points for this evening's event and how to engage with us. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available after the live session on our YouTube channel. All 5 of the 2024 North Carolina Reads book events will be available on our YouTube channel. We encourage you to subscribe to that channel at NC Humanities. We'd love to hear from you during today's event. If you have a question, please send it through the Q&A tab. Closed captions are available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We encourage you to share your experience on social media by tagging at NC Humanities on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. It is my pleasure to introduce this evening's moderator, Dr. Rebecca Godwin. Dr. Rebecca Godwin is Professor of English Emerita at Barton College, where she held the Jordan Chair of Southern Literature. Her book, Community Across Time, Robert Morgan's Words for Home, came out last year and includes his love of music. And now it's my pleasure to turn this evening over to Rebecca. Rebecca?
Thank you, Melissa. I'm very happy to be here and excited to hear what our speakers say about the book tonight. I enjoyed it very much. And I'm sure everyone did. I was just looking at where our audience members are located. It's exciting to have a large crowd. So, to introduce our speakers for tonight's discussion, Brendan Slocumb was raised in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and is a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Greensboro with a degree in music education and concentrations in viola and violin. For the past 2 decades, he has been a public and private school music educator. Brendan has performed with the Washington Metropolitan Symphony, the McLean Symphony, the Prince George's Philharmonic, and the Alexandria Symphony, and he's also served as concertmaster for the Nova Annandale Symphony Orchestra. In 2022, he published his first novel, The Violin Conspiracy, which became a Good Morning America book club pick. In 2023, he published his second novel, Symphony of Secrets, and he's now at work on the third novel. Dr. Marcus Pyle is the Franco Professor of Humanities and Assistant Music Professor at Davidson College. Dr. Pyle has also taught at MIT and Tufts University and studied viola performance at the Juilliard School and at the Royal Academy of Music in London. He also has degrees in comparative literature, music education, and historical musicology. In addition to his work with viola and musicology, Dr. Pyle is the founder of and CEO of Chamberworks, a music institute for beginning to intermediate string players in Dallas, Texas. We have some talented musicians here with us. So Brendan, well, I'm going to give you the first question. So for those who have not read the book yet or may need a refresher, would you please provide for us a brief overview of the book and tell us what led you to create this story?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me here today. This is a true honor being a North Carolinian myself. This is wonderful. All right, I got this down to like 25 seconds. The Violin Conspiracy is a story of a young man named Ray who discovers that his old family fiddle is actually a priceless Stradivarius violin. And that discovery catapults him into superstardom in the world of classical music. And right before the Tchaikovsky competition, which is basically the Olympics of classical music, his violin is stolen. Will he get it back? Will he get to compete? Will he find out who took it? You got to read it.
Good timing. What led you to create the story? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that now? I'm sure some additional details will come out during our discussion.
Sure. The summer of 2020 was the big motivator for me to write Violin Conspiracy. Being a working musician, when the pandemic hit, everything stopped, everything, and there was a huge degree of uncertainty. I needed a creative outlet, and I figured, hey, I saw an advertisement for writing books in the age of COVID. Why not? I submitted my terrible, terrible sci-fi novel from 2000, and I got a rejection letter telling me just how awful it was. And I took it as a challenge to write the Violin Conspiracy, and I wrote the first chapter and submitted it. And the agent in charge asked me if this was actually a book. I was like, no, I just wrote this. He's like, if you write it, I can sell it. I'm like, all right, you know what? I've been wanting to tell this story since I was 9 years old. This is a perfect opportunity. I had the time and I definitely had the motivation.
Something good out of COVID.
The one good thing.
Yeah.
That and the weight gain.
So the next question, and I think this is a rather big question that probably will elicit a lot of discussion. It's for both of you, one and then the other. So Ray experiences instances of prejudice and discrimination, racism in his daily life throughout the novel. How do those experiences affect Ray and his outlook on doing what he loves most? What does it show us about diversity or lack thereof in the world of classical music? So we've got kind of the life and the world of classical music. Marcus, take this one first.
Sure. I read Ray as kind of an unflappable character he's kind of enduring all of these really horrific acts of racism, these setbacks from his family, from competitors, from colleagues, from charlatan teachers. And he does not divert from his planned goal, which is to perform and win the Tchaikovsky competition. That's what he has in his mind. He wants to make it as a violinist, and he wants to do well in this competition. And so there's a kind of determination to Ray that I admired, despite all of these things that he has to endure. And that it's based in reality for a lot of classical musicians, Black classical musicians, BIPOC classical musicians. The microaggressions, the racial battle fatigue that we have to endure a lot of the times, because there aren't many people who look like us in classical music. And so where do you find your allies? Luckily, Ray found an ally in his teacher. and a mentor. So where do you find those allies? Where do you find your outlets? And how do you sustain a desire to achieve and share your love and passion for music when that classical world is beating you down repeatedly? And so I think the book really captured that quite well.
And the book also makes clear that lack of diversity in the classical music world, of course, yeah, with some numbers. So what about you, Brendan? What can you expand?
I agree with everything Dr. Pyle says, and with Ray, he was in the beginning of his journey, he was extremely naive. You know, it was one of those things where he just wanted to play. That was the basis of his entire existence. He just loved to play. And for anyone to knock him or to discourage him just because, you know, he just wanted to play. I want to do the same thing that you're doing. Why can't I do this? The world was a really cruel place to Ray, and he had to learn. He did a lot of on the job training to discover this, and to kind of gain his footing. You know, after so many microaggressions and you know macroaggressions, you know, it finally got to the point where he realized, okay, this is one of those things where I'm going to have to stand up for what it is that I really want to do when people believe that I'm not capable of it just because of the way that I look. And as Dr. Pyle said, that is a very, very real scenario. You know, there have been several times where I've walked into a place to perform and I have been mistaken for the custodian. You know, and it's a real thing, and it does hurt, and it does one of two things. It either toughens you up or it softens you up and makes you want to quit. And fortunately, Ray had the wherewithal to keep going. You know, he was definitely inspired to keep going, especially from his grandmother and his teacher and those allies that he had. So it's definitely a real thing, and that comes from real life experiences.
I have a feeling that Ray followed your model of being tough in the face of
Well,
hurtful situations and
you have
discrimination.
to. You either let it destroy you or you let it make you stronger. Use it as ammunition. And I was very fortunate to be able to, you know, I'm going to use this as ammunition. It's going to make me stronger in doing what it is that I would love to do. And, you know, regardless of what anyone else says, if I'm capable of doing this and I believe that I am, I'm going to do it.
And Rebecca, as you said, the book cites some statistics. And one of the things I liked about the book is that it is didactic without being overbearing or overpowering. So it's teaching you what a day in the life of a musician actually is and feels like. And it teaches you about the disparities in the classical music world without cramming it down your throat, so to speak. And the statistics from the League of American Orchestras that only 1.8% of all American orchestras are Black musicians is astonishing. And I think now that statistic has been updated, but it's still only, I think, 2.2 or 2.3%. So there's been marginal increase from, I think, 2019 to today. And there's still a lot of progress that can be made.
You answered one of my follow-up questions, which is whether there has been some change in the very, very recent past, some improvement.
I think with stories like this, you know, it's actually helping to move those statistics. You know, there was a time where you wouldn't have thought twice about going to the symphony and actually looking at the makeup of the orchestra. But you know, after reading a story like this, it's like, oh wow, now it's glaring. It's right there. Now I see it. Okay, it makes sense now. So I'm happy that this story has at least brought some more awareness.
Oh, I agree. And I thank you for the story. So you've just spoken to the power of literature.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for changing hearts and minds and making us see things that we have never thought to see. I'll bet some of the questions come back to this topic. So here's another question for you, both of you. So the novel explores the complicated dynamics between Ray and most of his immediate family, with some of the experiences being positive and supportive, while others are definitely not. So would you talk about Ray's relationships with various family members, such as his mom and others?
Oh, I knew
So
that was coming. I knew it.
yeah, Brendan first, and then we'll enjoy Marcus's observations.
First, Grandma Nora is one of my absolute favorite characters in this story. Not only because she supported Ray and loved him unconditionally, but because she was my actual grandmother. She was a real person, and she and I had some of those conversations, like for real. I remember being in her kitchen, watching her chop up nasty squash that I would never eat, and having these conversations. And she was, an unconditional supporter of Ray. Same thing with his Aunt Rochelle. I'm going to probably surprise a few people with my commentary on Mom. Um, Yes, Mom was definitely a piece of work, and she was not very supportive of Ray's career decision. A lot of people ask me where that comes from, and is it like, what was my mom that way? My mom was absolutely not that way. She would never try to keep me from pursuing music. But in Mom's defense in the story, perhaps she was the way that she was because she'd never seen anyone who looked like Ray be successful in the career path that he had chosen. And the only way she knew how to protect him was to discourage him from, going out and just getting devastated because there was no way that he was going to ever be able to be successful at this. And I think I think that actually comes from, we in the Black community. I'm not speaking for all Black people. I would never do that. But it's not very common to have a teenage boy playing violin. So how do you support that? If you've never been to a classical concert, you don't listen to classical music, you really don't know how the best way to support your child. And I'm thinking Mom really had a hard time figuring out what she could do to support Ray. And it's unfortunately it's very common that there's a lot of people in the communities, when their children of color play instruments, they really don't know how to support the kids. And that's one of those things that I'm definitely trying to, through stories like this, I'm trying to educate parents just a bit more to let them understand that, when your kid decides that they want to do something like this, it truly is an investment. It's a lifelong investment, and it starts from the day they pick up an instrument and what you can do to help support your kid. And so I'm going to come to Mom's defense just a little bit on that, in that regard.
Well, I would also add that the payoff for performing violin is not immediate, like some of the other jobs that the mom mentioned throughout the book, or working at Popeyes, for example. But so the payoff is not immediate and is not guaranteed, even if you go to the best schools or you win the top awards, and to be a person who looks like Ray, the chances are even smaller. So I think there's a little bit of being a realist, grounded in kind of her material needs that need to be met, that's fueling her character there.
See a comment. She could have been a little more supportive. Brendan, I know that scene that you're alluding to when the mother, says, "Have you ever seen a Black boy in classical music?" And I felt that she was trying to protect him a bit.
Yeah. Let's go with that. We're going to go with that.
Well, I wanted to ask a follow-up about his relationship with family members, particularly in Ray's willingness to share money so willingly. And some people I've discussed the book with, some readers that I've discussed it with, just wondered if he really had to do that. I mean, I think we see why, but would you kind of talk about that a little bit? He's so generous.
Yeah, I actually got a lot of blowback from a lot of readers because of that aspect of Ray's personality. So why would you keep giving these people, these terrible, greedy people, money? Ray, I think it was just inherent in Ray's nature. He was just a very, very nice, respectful young man. And in his mind, in his heart of hearts, you if you've got something, and someone else needs it, of course it's going to be yours because that's how you're supposed to be in life. I really think that that was his philosophy. And especially because it was family, even though, well, finally he wised up. He actually did get, okay, they're using me at this point. But in the very beginning, I truly believe that Ray felt like it was his obligation and responsibility to help support his family because he was doing well. And I don't think that's too uncommon. I always said, I always tell my siblings, when I win the lottery, I'm taking care of you, I'm taking care of you, I'm taking, it's just one of those things that's in your head. And I really feel like Ray was such a nice kid, that was just that was natural for him to do.
I'll also say it speaks to his character not being in it for the money.
Right.
The money doesn't, it's not what propels him to achieve these great accolades that he does eventually achieve. So he's not in it for the money. And then I would also caution people that when we read, we're starting in the middle of a story that's already, begun. So we don't know what's been going on in the past with Ray and his mom. We don't know what their family dynamic is there, that he maybe understands her, what we understand as selfishness differently. And so there might be some kind of dynamic at play there. And also a lot of times with first generation scholars, performers, students, and people from lower socioeconomic statuses, they come to college or they get into their career with the expectation that they will send money back to their family. Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty common thing. So for me, I just understood that within the complex dynamics of his family unit and what was expected of him as the kind of child who's going on and making money and doing great things. And that's not the case for everyone, but it certainly is a case for some people.
If my brother and sister are listening, yes, I got you guys. I got you, I promise.
Some of the uncles seemed very interested in the money. Yeah. So there's a good contrast, Ray and some of the other family members, though. Yeah. But it was a tight family overall, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's move. There's some questions for you. We'll get to those later. Let's move out of the family for a minute, and then we'll come back to family because we really have to talk about these ancestors, this absent character who's so important that we'll come back to in a minute. But his teacher, Dr. Janice Stevens, his mentor, as Marcus mentioned, having a mentor is so important. So would you talk a little bit about what might have happened to Ray had she not been so interested in him, so willing to give of her time and money for him, and just really to step in whenever he needed her? So it's kind of a what would happen without that character kind of question.
First, I see my Auntie Faye is on the webinar. Hello, Auntie Faye. It's nice to hear.
Hello.
I think in the case of Dr. Janice Stevens, everyone needs a Dr. Janice Stevens in their life, and I'm sure most of us could name someone that we would associate with Dr. Stevens. I think had she not come into Ray's life, I do believe he eventually would have been successful, but it would have been a much tougher road for him because his passion and love for music was so strong. I think it would have catapulted him regardless into success. But with her help and her guidance, that it's just like, the difference between, learning to drive on a Volkswagen versus learning to drive on a BMW. They both will get you to where you need to go, but one's going to be a definitely easier road to take. She was one of those people that she believed in him. She wasn't out for herself. She was very selfless. And I'm actually considering writing a story about Dr. Janice Stevens, because she had all of these contacts. And, how did she get to where she was? She knew everyone and was capable of doing so many things. That was probably a very difficult road for her as well. So she understood what it would take to have, to help someone, and what it would mean to help someone like Ray to get to where it was that he wanted to be. And I think that she believed he could have done it, but she saved him a great deal of heartache by helping him out every opportunity she got. And I think it helped her as well. And I can speak
Mhm.
from personal experience. All it takes is that one person to believe in you and to give you that one little nudge that you need, and it makes a world of difference. I am a huge advocate for mentorship in any and every possible way, because unless it's happened to you, unless you've had someone in your corner, it's life changing. It could be life changing. That one opportunity, all it takes is one. So, that's why she was so incredibly important, and she stuck with Ray all through thick and thin. She was there, and he knew that she was there, which makes her such a great character, because there was never any doubt. Well, not in my mind, at least, that Janice was there for Ray. She was specifically there for him.
A second mother figure.
Oh, absolutely.
In a way, yeah.
Good mother figure.
Yeah. So Marcus, what can you say more about mentors? I know at a university you have a chance to mentor and see the need.
I try to be like Janice Stevens as much as possible for my students. In the fall, I will have a student coming from Chamberworks to Davidson, starting as a first-year student. So that's going to be another type of mentorship model for me, where I've seen someone go through my program that I created for underrepresented, underprivileged students now entering into college. And so I can hopefully be the Janice Stevens role for that student, who also is a violinist. But mentorship is extremely important, not just in academia, but also in orchestras. When you get a spot in an orchestra, it's not guaranteed that you'll keep it. There's a tenure process. And if you don't have the right mentors throughout that tenure process, things can get very political, very nasty, and you need someone to help you navigate that. Because that's another narrative that you're entering that already has threads in the past that you're being plopped into. So someone who's savvy and knows the lay of the land is what sometimes the difference between retention and someone leaving the field.
True.
When I was reading, I thought about her gender, her being female, and I was, just wondering whether she had experienced some, sexism along the way as she was making her way into the field of music. I thought that was just maybe a minor thread there, and she didn't say a lot about it.
That would have been a totally different novel. And believe me, I only had 300 some odd pages. That's what I'm going to say. I'll leave it there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Rebecca, you're not wrong. I mean, I'm thinking of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, so I can't speak to Janice Stevens.
Okay.
The Vienna Philharmonic was known for being all male, all white until not too long ago, when they, I think, very publicly, very infamously hired a harp player in, I think, 97. So there was a bit of contention there about what is an ensemble, who's able to make music. And so sexism and racism often go hand in hand. And they're symptoms of a much larger structural issue.
Exactly. Yeah. Good discussion. So let's come back to this terribly important absent character who's on the stage all the time, Leon. I enjoyed his story very much and loved that letter. The letter that the 9-year-old writes. So Ray learns about this ancestor, Leon, and more about his family's history. only later in the novel. So one aspect of this story, of course, is family legacy. So what can you say about Leon's story, showing readers some important points about family legacies? And then, of course, there's the larger social context as well. So Brendan?
Well, with Leon's story, the whole thing, it was okay. So I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher first, and that's my career path. That I'm always going to be a teacher, and I'm always teaching. I didn't want to beat a history lesson into people and make it feel like homework. I really wanted to tell a good story. And I went this direction because, no offense to North Carolina public schools, I was a teacher in North Carolina public schools, so please, I'm not no dissing, no disrespect. But when I was in school, we learned America had slaves, black people picked cotton, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, ta-da, and that's all there was. We never get in depth about life as a slave and just how brutal and cruel it was. And I wanted to just enlighten people on, there's a reason that people had to be so resilient back then. There's an absolute reason, just because of the brutality of slavery. And with Leon, I thought it was a really, really interesting story. With it's something that could just spark imagination of, with him being related to the slave master, and just what the violin meant. It was more than just an expensive instrument. It really was their family heritage. Without that instrument, without his mom's, his Leon's mom's, just encouragement of him, none of them would be there. Ray would not be there today. His entire family would not be there. So that instrument was it was an entire legacy. It was the heritage of the family. And I really feel like Grandma Nora understood that, and she was trying to impart that on her other kids. And Ray is the only one who truly picked up on that. So that's one reason their relationship was so close, because he got her. He understood. He understood where she was coming from and the importance of the instrument to her. And with that letter in chapter 33, I did extensive research, and it was very, very, very difficult to write. Believe it or not, that's the toned down version that made it into the book. I actually had to tone it down, because it was so brutal. And so, I mean, I had to stop at a certain point when I was writing it. It's just like, whoa, I need to take a break. This is really hardcore stuff. But it's one of those things where heritage, your family heritage, you're so much more than just your last name. And I'm really happy that through reading stories like this, people honestly begin to see that, and they begin to develop appreciation for not only their past relatives, but for what they went through and what they had to endure and what it means to them today. It's like you look back to the past to see what made you who you are today. And I thought that was a really important concept that I really wanted to expand on, especially with that letter.
How many times did you rewrite it just to get the voice of the 9-year-old?
Well, it's a good thing that I used to teach elementary school. So I was like, okay, what words would they mispronounce and would they misspell? All right, that was, and I went through it a couple of times, and I actually asked one of my nephews, who's real young, to read something and to spell some stuff out, and it worked. It worked really well, and I'm just happy that they came across the way that it was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
Something I find really poignant in that letter. Well, there are a few things. The first is that the Freedom Papers come in tandem with the violin. So the violin is kind of Ray's gateway to freedom, and also the family's freedom legacy. And then there's also, that sets up this kind of parallel between Ray and the violin. He doesn't understand his full potential at the beginning. The violin is in disrepair. People don't really see its value until it's all cleaned up and polished. And so there's this kind of interesting parallelism between the violin being a kind of gateway for new development throughout the novel. And then also, I'm thinking as a historian, the fact that the fiddle, which is the violin, was the predominant instrument for enslaved people to play, and that's documented in and through ex-slave narratives. So almost 100% more often in slave narratives do you find that formerly enslaved people played the fiddle than the banjo. So we banjo as an African diasporic instrument,
right,
100% more common. And it's only after the Great Migration that things changed, because it had too many resonances with plantation slavery, and people were trying to push back against that and expand into metropolis cities, things like that. So I found the letter to be very interesting and poignant, and playing with all of those different aspects.
That's very interesting. So say more about that when something comes to mind. Yeah, I'm more familiar with the banjo as the instrument. Yeah, that came to us from African Americans. Good. I think we're going to have some good questions from the audience members too about much of what you're talking about. I have a question about Nora, but I'll wait and see if someone else asks it. Yeah, just one more note. I mean, those scenes, as you allude to, were very graphic. No more so than what we do read in slave narratives or freedom narratives, as we might call them. You know, the Frederick Douglass and the Harriet Jacobs. But I noted that you didn't stay too long on a scene, although there was plenty there to envision and to feel sick about.
Right.
Yeah,
I did
actually, some of what happened was as gruesome as anything I've read. Yeah.
I think I'm going to thank you for that. I think.
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
That could have been an entire, story. And it was only one small aspect. I wanted to keep the focus on Ray's story. And that was just one small bit of it. And again, I didn't want, as an educator, I didn't want it to feel like homework for people. I didn't want to just beat people over the head. This is what it is. This is what it is. This is what it is. You should feel terrible. You should feel terrible. It was just part of the story. And I really felt like that particular aspect of the story helped move the narrative along. And I felt that it was important to include it. I could have left that out, and just said, oh, that he found a letter in the case, and that was it. But I just really felt like that the descriptions in the story were really important to understanding exactly why this instrument was so important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So could you just say a little bit more, maybe both of you, about what you would hope readers would take away from the novel about their own family legacies? Not to be preachy, but just to discuss family legacies a little bit more. Those stories were so important.
Dr. Pyle?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the takeaways from the book is, in part, family is what you make of it. I mean, Ray picked up family throughout his journey. As we already talked about, Janice Stevens became a kind of surrogate mother for him. Nicole even becomes part of his little internal family there. And he has some colleagues that he is in frequent contact with too. So I think family is what you make it. Did you want to add to that, Brendan?
In for me, I truly just wanted to write a good story. I really just wanted to write a good, entertaining story. And it was really cathartic for me to write, because a lot of those experiences that Ray had in the story, they were real. They really happened. And I would get messages from other musicians. Thank you so much for putting that in. That same thing happened to me. I would tell people that this event took place, and they would just look at me like I'm crazy and tell me that, no, you were just exaggerating. Oh, you didn't understand. No, it was not like that. So just being able to get out there and put it out there that things like this really do happen. I was really happy that that actually came across. And what I really want people to take away from this story is to do what you love because you love it, and never, ever, ever, ever let anyone tell you that you can't do something. Never. Not because you've got a certain haircut or a certain zip code or a certain bank account or a certain skin color. There's no reason why you should not be able to do anything. I've been told so many times, and I hope this is not the case for Dr. Pyle, but I'm guessing that it's probably not. We've been told so many times that we're not, this is not for us. No, you can't do this. You should do something that you're going to be good at. Man, if I had $1 for every time someone told me that, I would be a really super rich guy. But I just want people to understand that it's okay to pursue whatever it is that you love because you love it. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. You do it because you love it. And that's the reason that I chose music. And that's the reason that I've stuck with it, because I absolutely love it. It brings me joy to no end. And I love sharing that joy with other people. And for someone to tell me that I can't do it, that would be a death sentence. There's no, never, 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 ever let anyone tell you you can't do something.
Yes. Okay, Marcus, anything to add?
Well, I would just add, in terms of the legacy question, Ray is kind of lucky in that he has documents that can be traced back certain number of generations. That's not the case for a lot of African Americans in this country. So for him to be able to even have that through line and documents that tell the story of how this instrument passed hands is exceptional in terms of being able to trace your history and figure out where you came from as a person. So I think that's something that he should treasure. And I think that's something that Grandma Nora knew was something to be treasured. Because there's so many silences in the archives and so many stories that are untold and that will remain untold, or that can only be told through speculative methods. So for him to be able to have that kind of proximity to his history and to play out his great, great, great grandfather's, maybe I left out
great
is remarkable.
It is, yeah. And also, I think the novel gives those of us who have some vague idea of interesting family stories, it gives us the impetus to do some research. There might be some documents that we just haven't found yet. Although for African Americans, I know what you're saying is absolutely true, and somewhat for all of us. So good point. I think we have a lot of questions for the audience, but before we turn to them, could you tell us what you might be working on now? Are you ready to share the third novel, Brendan?
Yes. I am so happy to announce that I am completely done with my third book, and it's entitled Dark Maestro. I'm staying in the whole musical thriller type genre. My goal is to become the Stephen King of musical thrillers. That's the goal. That's the goal. I'm setting that goal for myself. I just finished it. It's being edited right now and bound for the ARCs to be sent out. It's a story about a cellist, witness protection, illegal organ harvesting, and comic books, and it takes place here in Washington, D.C. And it's a story about a relationship between a father and son that can get. I love the story, and I hope everybody else does too. That's all I can say.
Good. Yeah, can't wait, as somebody said. Yeah.
Good.
Marcus, what about you? And I'm interested, maybe now's a good time to ask you to tell us a little bit more about the chamber works while Melanie's deciding what questions to start with.
Sure. So a couple of things I'm working on, is one of them is an article on a concept called metonymic blackness, which I think Brendan has talked about in other interviews. And it's this concept that before the murder of George Floyd, a lot of what we consider diverse musical programming were pieces that only alluded to Blackness without actually being written by Black people. For example, the New World Symphony by Dvorak. And so I'm working on an article that questions how that filters into questions of diversity and representation. Then I'm also working on an album and oral history of the composer T.J. Anderson, famous African-American composer whose works go unrecorded. And last year I interviewed Rhiannon Giddens, who said, "What's recorded is what's remembered." And so I will really want to record 3 of his chamber music pieces, his dissertation composition, and one of his later pieces all in 2000. So it'll be a recording project that spans about 55 years.
Wow.
And shows the development of his style interspersed with an oral history of his life.
Wow.
This work is so important, the work that both of you are doing for our time now, for any time, but for our time now, really significant. Yeah, I appreciate it. Melanie, do you have some questions to start us off with from our listeners?
Do we have any questions? We have tons of questions.
I know it. That's why I was seeing the numbers. We'll go ahead and go to them. Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm Melanie. I'm going to kind of talk off screen here, but just want to say thank you both, Brendan and Marcus, so much for such a wonderful and insightful conversation so far. And yes, we have tons of questions, and we're going to try and get to as many as we can. So I appreciate you both sharing your thoughts and insights as we answer some of these questions, and also for being vulnerable as we talk through some of these. So first off, we've got a question for both of you, maybe a tough one. Do you love writing and or teaching as much as you love playing music?
Be honest.
I'm going to keep it real. I am a musician first. Writing is a very solitary activity. You're often by yourself. And if you do feel like sharing your work, you're very selective about who gets to read it. Whereas, you're being a musician, you get to play with people who enjoy the exact same thing that you do, and they're there for the exact same reason, and you get to share. Mm-hmm. And it's an instant gratification of being able to share that joy. So I'm going to go with being a musician and playing slightly above writing.
I say performing music is right on par with teaching for me. I would say I like them both equally, and I like that Davidson College allows me to write scholarly writing, perform, and teach equally, and they value all of those things. I always knew I wanted to be a teacher of some sort and a performer, so finding a place where I can do both is ideal.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
No wrong answers here, right? So I appreciate that. I will say again, hopefully you all have had an opportunity to read through this chat. Thank you again so much to everyone who's tuning in tonight. I've really enjoyed reading this chat, and we've got some great back and forthers. So we are all not alone tonight. That is for sure. We have lots of people joining us. We've also gotten a ton of compliments. We've got some folks saying that they're inspired by Dr. Stevens. I wish Brennan could instruct my son. We've got even, Brennan, you were saying, right, family and friends. And so again, thanks everyone for tuning in and being on tonight. Got another question here. Starts off, understatement, Ray practices a lot. How does repetition improve performance? How do you approach practicing as a way to make improvements, and in what ways?
Oh, wow. Dr. Pyle, why don't you take that one first?
Okay. You can't just have pure repetition. I will just say that. Practicing is a learned skill, and this is something I try to ingrain in my chamberwork students, that you have to practice often and correctly. So if you practice bad habits, you will perform bad habits. So practicing is actually really hard work. It takes a lot of focus. It's not just pure repetition, but it's also problem solving on the fly. It's also knowing when to rest. It's also thinking about creative solutions. Yeah, it's a stamina issue. The best way to do it depends on the passage. Chunking is one term. So you just take out the chunks that are most difficult and work on those, and rotate between different chunks. Don't get stuck on one chunk. There are a bunch of different techniques for fixing problems, but it just depends on what your problem is.
Yeah, it's really important. I agree to learn how to practice. You know, a lot of people just make the mistake of thinking that if I play it over and over and over and over and over again, that's going to do it. You know, like Dr. Pyle said, you will learn incorrectly. You know, you'll learn how to do it incorrectly, and it's just going to cause you more heartache, and it's going to cause more work for you to get it right. Listening is just as important. You know, not only you have to, you're never going to hear the same thing twice. If you're practicing correctly, you will not hear the same thing twice. So just, you know, learning how to practice repetition is extremely, yes, repetition is important, but learning the aspects of those repetitive sections really is just as important.
And being critical with yourself. So not letting anything slide, but not talking down to yourself or anything like that in the practice room, but keeping yourself honest. If something's sharp, saying it's sharp. If something's flat, saying it's flat. Not letting anything slide, and practicing slowly. Sometimes we practice with a drone that plays one pitch, and we can hear the tuning increments with it. There's a whole class when you go to conservatory called ear training or oral skills that's teaching you how to listen so that you can be more efficient in the practice room. But that's a great question.
This is a great question, and I appreciate you both sharing your thoughts on that. Brendan, I want to switch now to talk a little bit about some of the characters and plot points in the book, if you will. So we've got a question here from an audience member that says, can you talk a little bit more about the process of jumping between timelines in the book? This audience member says, you went back and forth from the present with the stolen violin to the past, seeing Ray discover his passion, growing into it. It was a very compelling way to structure it, and I'm curious at what point you chose to structure it that way. Was that intentional, or did that kind of just happen as you were writing it?
That actually was an intentional technique, and in all of everything that I write, I love to use dual timelines. I think you can tell a bigger story, and there's so much more. You know, you can expand on so many more topics when you do a dual timeline. And I've just gotten accustomed to it, and I love reading stories that jump back and forth because it keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it really is a good tool to keep the pacing going. If I am reading something that takes place in the past and you get to a cliffhanger, then I know that I've got to, you know, make whatever's happening in the present just as interesting, just as entertaining. And then I love cliffhangers. Who doesn't love a good cliffhanger, you know? And, you know, when you're going back and forth, it's like ping pong. Oh, what's that? What's next? What's next? It's great. It's a wonderful writing technique, and I do it intentionally. And I love reading stories that people actually do that too. I think it's becoming more and more popular. A lot of people are beginning to use that technique a lot more, and definitely worthwhile. It's a lot of fun to do.
Octavia Butler uses it.
Mm-hmm.
You're a fan? Yeah, I'm sure you're a fan of Octavia Butler.
Of course.
Yeah. But I thought it also worked really well for this novel because, you know, as a kind of Bildungsroman, there's no linear progression for Ray. It's always fits and starts for him, which I thought worked well with going back and forth in time.
Thank you for sharing that, Marcus. I want to switch now and talk a little bit about something you mentioned, Brennan. You know, you had a beautiful thought there of, you know, this profession, you know, not being for us and doing things despite that, you know, people may say no to you, but you do it because you love it. And so in that same vein, we've got a couple of questions here I want to touch on. We have an audience member who asks, in both of your books, you bring characters to a self-awareness of real, true prejudice as an awakening incident. Can you explain in more detail a specific incident that you experienced that caused you to wake?
Wow, how much time do we have? Let me see. Wow, let's pick a day. Oh my goodness. Wow, that's a great question. Whoa, if I could just pick one. you know, that's kind of difficult because, you know, this a lot of the awakenings that I've had have taken place so long ago. It feels like ancient history at this point, but I can remember being an extremely naive young man who much like Ray, just wanted to play. I just wanted to play, and things that would happen, you know, I would take the blame for it. It's like, okay, that was my fault. I did something wrong that caused, you know, these people to look at me this way or to say something like that. And it took me a very long time to realize, wait, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm doing the exact same thing that, you know, my colleague who doesn't look like me is doing. It's the exact same thing, but I'm getting treated one way and they're getting treated another way. There comes a time where you've got to actually stand up for yourself, and once I did that, I think it was because, you know, someone told me, you know, ugh, I hate to even bring this up, but I was playing, I think I was playing the Messiah one day, and I played the Messiah a million billion times. No, I could play every part. I could probably play the cello part if I really wanted to, but, and I walked into a church to play Messiah, and the director looked at me and immediately he assigned someone to sit with me because he didn't think that I could handle the part. And, you know,
Oh, wow.
I had the
Mhm.
option of getting up and walking out. I could have gone off and just cussed him out and just, you know, I could have done all of that. But instead, I was like, you know, I'm just going to, you know, I'll keep it together. And I'm playing, and the person that is assigned to help me has no idea what she's doing because she's never played the piece before. And I'm helping her. I'm
Mhm.
giving her, you know, let's do the bowing this way, let's do this trill like this, you know, we're going to do this in this position. And, you know, and then it dawned on me. I realized I was like, okay, it's not me. I get it. Now I understand that it's okay to stand up for myself and to, you know, I work just as hard as everyone else, probably harder. And I'm not going to let someone, you know, that was my awakening. That was it. I was like, okay, I know. Now I'm not going to allow anyone to, you know, to downplay what it is that I've worked so hard to be able to do for whatever reason, regardless of the reason. That is not happening. It's one of those things. It's hard, but it's necessary. And once it happens, you've gone through it. You don't have to go through it again. And now then you know you can stand up for yourself anytime you need to.
Brendan, that's so well put, and I really appreciate you being vulnerable and answering that question. Thank you for sharing that with us. No, it's beautiful. And Marcus, you know, if you want to answer that in your own way, I welcome you to. Otherwise, I've got a ton of more questions we can move on to.
Um, I would just cite one instance of the head of strings at the Royal Academy of Music, where I did my undergraduate degree. My first 2 years at Royal Academy were idyllic. I loved it. We had a different head of strings. This head of strings comes in, and there's contention with me and the other Black student, literally the other.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into Juilliard, which I kept a secret that I was even auditioning, she told me in a private meeting, "Oh, I heard you got accepted to Juilliard." How did she know? I didn't tell her, but she knew. And I said, "Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited." And she says, I said that I was, you know, shocked. It's not easy to get into Juilliard. And she said, "Well, you never know what they're looking for."
Oh,
Meaning, I got in for diversity or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
7 people to be accepted that year. And so that left a lasting impression with me. That's just one of the things she did. But I'm also following an Instagram page called Orchestra is Racist, which posts anonymous stories of micro and macroaggressions that BIPOC people have had to endure that often go silenced. And there's a whole community of support in the chat that's kind of reaffirming. Mm-hmm.
Thank you both for sharing that. And I do encourage you, Marcus and Brendan, if there's anything that you want to share in terms of resources, we'd love to follow up, or we can put those in the chat too. So that sounds like an interesting page you're talking about. And again, thank you for sharing your experiences. Marcus, I have another question for you, along those lines a little bit. how did you get interested in chamber music? If you could tell our audience a little bit more about your pathway into that.
Okay, I started in public school. I had a teacher who was a lot like a Janice Stevens. We're still really close friends, even though she retired. Judith Pruitt is her name. She started me on viola in elementary school. And I went to the instrument petting zoo where you try out all the instruments. And I had narrowed it down to viola or cello. And so she said, have you made a decision? And I told her viola. I said, I think I want to do cello. And she said, well, we already have enough people signed up. You'll do viola. And I'm not a quitter, so but chamber music is especially important for me. And the reason it's the cornerstone of the ChamberWorks program that I started is because there's a sense of democracy and democratization. So the students are as involved in the final product as I am. I'm not preaching to them how the music should be. It's a collaborative process. I play alongside them. We don't play with a conductor, even in chamber orchestra, so everyone takes ownership of the musical output. It's much harder for the students, but I think they respect their musical output more and the process more because they are players and producers alongside the faculty.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
I want to pop over to another question, kind of in, again, that same vein, talking about schools and how folks kind of get involved with music. And we've had some great back and forth again in the chat. But this audience member notes and kind of asks, what kinds of things are being done system-wide to introduce young people to the classical music world? I want to share too, this person wrote, some of her experiences, or their experiences rather. When I was a young person in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, I'm now a 73-year-old African-American woman, we were introduced to classical music in 5th and 6th grades by being taken to a special performance at the Charlotte Symphony Orchestra. Is that still happening?
Yes. Not nearly as much as it should or could, but it does actually still happen. And it's unfortunately, it's one of the first, it was one of the first introductions to classical music that a lot of kids get. And I think that, if they go in 4th or 5th grade, that's a crime. They should be introduced to classical music kindergarten, day one. It should be not just classical music, all types of music. I'm a huge advocate for public school music. I, like Dr. Pyle, was introduced to the violin through a public school music program, and I had zero inclination to learn to play anything. I just wanted to get out of class twice a week. So I was like, yeah, I'm in. If we get out of class, sure, I'll do it. But it ended up being, one of those things that I absolutely fell in love with. And I feel like if you introduce kids to all types of music early on, then it's not so much of a stigma to say, oh, this Black kid likes classical music. Well, it's just music. It's not a certain type of music for a certain type of individual. Classical music in the hallways on Monday, jazz on Tuesday, rock and roll on Wednesday, hip hop on Thursday, bluegrass on Friday, then you're used to hearing this stuff all the time, and it becomes normal. It becomes natural, as opposed to something that's very, very specific. That's a niche thing that only certain people get to experience.
Marcus, did you want to add anything to that? Maybe about a little bit more about what you're doing now? I know it's not grade school, but
well, the kids are ages 11 to 18. So a lot of what I do is work with schools to kind of recruit kids. So I'll go in and play concerts or play little demonstration sessions at schools and coach ensembles or talk to orchestra programs or judge competitions for Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, which is something that I did this past fall, judging their orchestra concerts. So all of that goes a long way, because I can't tell you the first time I saw a Black person as a classical musician, I think was my first year at Royal Academy of Music, and it was Chichi Wanoku, who's now started Chineke, the Chineke Orchestra, which is an orchestra in the UK, founded for the sole purpose of giving a platform for Black and Brown music. And the orchestra is primarily all Black. And so they've done great things touring around the world, sharing music and giving a platform for new and emerging composers and performers.
And they are fantastic, by the way.
They are, yeah.
You ever get a chance to see them, you should. It's phenomenal.
Among the many things I'll be looking up after we tune off tonight. So thank you for sharing that. That's a great resource. Brendan, I want to pop back over a little bit about the book. We've got a couple of questions in the chat about Ray and Nicole's relationship. Could you talk a little bit about that? We've got some folks that kind of see her as the villain and want to know maybe why that is.
Why was she the villain? I think that was pretty much obvious why she was a villain. But that, you know, I get a lot of flack for, or get a lot of feedback, I'll say, for Ray being so taken by Nicole. You know what? I truly, truly, truly believe in my heart of hearts that Nicole did care for Ray. I truly believe that she did care for him, but she cared for money even more. And their relationship, you know, you think about it, Ray was a loner most of his life. You know, he was always practicing or always doing things where it was very non-social. He didn't have a great deal of friends. And when he found someone, you know, who was interested in him, for him, not just because what he could do for her, you know, of course, you know, you get things going on in your head, and why not? Of course, she's the one. She's the greatest thing that's ever happened to any of us. And you know, I get it. I totally get it. We can all get smitten at one point in our young lives, and you know, just I truly think that Nicole did care for Ray at one point, but she was just a bit more. Her avarice took over where her love for Ray left off, and as a result, yeah, there you go.
I just wanted to know why you made the violist a villain.
I knew that was coming. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it.
Because we're the most least likely to be villains.
Oh, that's it. That's totally it. You know, I'm a violist myself. I get it. I totally get it, dude. I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you.
That's great. Well, it goes without saying there are a ton of people in this chat that are awesome and excited about this new book. So congratulations, Brendan. We want to talk, you know, hopefully at the end of the conversation, you can tell us a little bit more about it. I know you gave us a synopsis, but when we can expect it and all of that. But we've got a comment here that says, someone in our chat who says, I love the book and listened to every piece of music in it. I only wish that we knew more about Pop Pop's relationship with his master, possibly his father. And then they suggest maybe that's another novel. So you might have to, you know, start number 4.
That definitely is going to be, I'm going to follow up with that. I just think it's a really interesting relationship, a really interesting dynamic between the two. And believe it or not, it was very, very common. It was extremely common for, you know, slave masters to have children by the enslaved women. And, you know, sometimes the relationships were fantastic between father and child. Other times they were just non-existent. And you know, and the whole dynamic between, you know, the wife and the children, you know, it's just, there's so many areas that I could cover in that. And that's going to make a fantastic story one of these days too. And I just want to kind of dovetail into, you know, with this particular story, I'm really happy that people understand that it is a feel-good story. It's not one of those complaining, I'm not going to complain because the world is racist and everyone is against me and there's no way that I'm going to be able to do anything because I'm Black. I want people to understand that it doesn't matter, you know, what color you are, what your race or your ethnicity is. you can do whatever you want to do. You can. It's totally possible to do whatever it is that you want to do. And I really want people to take this from that story, and I'm sure Dr. Pyle you know, can co-sign on this, where, so many times we've probably been told you need to do something that you're going to be good at because this is not for you. If I had a nickel for every time somebody said that to me, I just want people to understand that it can be done. You absolutely can do it. Do it because you love it. No other reason, because you love it, and never let anyone tell you that you can't.
Hear to that. Brendan, this is another question for you, and Marcus, maybe you can add in some of your experiences as well. This person says, "Thank you so much for your shout out to Goldsboro in the novel. Did you have a positive experience here?"
Good old I wanted to, with being in North Carolina, being a North Carolinian, and growing up here, I wanted to portray North Carolina in a very positive light. I have been, I've gotten feedback from people saying, thank you for not making people from North Carolina, we're not all just dumb rednecks, not all of us. And I'm like, I never knew that we had that stereotype. I didn't know that. But just to let people know that people from the South, we're just as intelligent and just as talented as everybody else across the country. And I wanted to represent my state, and North Carolina has been really good to me, and I wanted to show my appreciation.
And we're thankful and grateful for that. I have one more question here. Brendan, this person wants to know, what challenged you most about crafting this narrative? I know that's a big question.
Wow, that is a good question. Believe it or not, it was what to include in the story. There were so many aspects. I've got what I call a scraps pile. I could make an entire novel out of everything that I left out of the story. Just different characters and different scenarios, and like I mentioned earlier, I've only got 300 some odd pages, and you could go on and on and on and on and on. But I wanted to frame it in the context of a mystery. I love mysteries. I grew up reading mysteries. Sherlock Holmes, I'm a huge fan. Agatha Christie, I've read all of them, and it's just, I really wanted to do it in the style of a mystery. And I figured that if I understand about theft. I had a violin stolen when I was in high school, so that was easy for me to do. That's really what helped shape the narrative that way, and it wasn't too terribly difficult because I was living some of those experiences, and it was easy for me to just kind of weave my way through that narrative.
Thank you for sharing that, Brendan. Well, I think that's all the questions that I see. Rebecca, do you have a question that you wanted to ask? Or Marcus and Brendan, I encourage you to ask any other questions that you have for each other.
Well, I think an interesting point is that Nora did not tell Ray where the documents were in the case. So at one point I was thinking, she sends him up to the attic to look, kind of to make sure he really wants it, right? So what were your thoughts about that? She dies, and then it's a long time finding the documents, and that's kind of interesting how outsiders find them. And so what are your thoughts there? Yeah.
Yeah,
It adds to the mystery.
it does, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
one reason that I kind of kept it
Okay.
in for a while. Just that one aspect, and um, it goes back to the reason that she wanted Ray to actually have the instrument. She knew that he was dedicated. When she told him, "Oh, go look up in the attic," and he couldn't find it up there. Grandma Nora knew where it was the entire time. She knew. But if Ray was going to take his time and energy to actually search for this, for what reason? For no other reason than the love of the violin, that proved to her and to him that he was in it for the right reasons. And I had to keep some of the mystery element in, so I kept the reveal of the letter hidden for a while.
I think it worked.
It's a great question, Rebecca. Well, again, thank you all so much for your questions. And I'm going to pass it back over to Melissa, I think, to send us off. But again, thank you so much for this great conversation. And thanks to everybody in the chat for tuning in tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie.
Yes.
We'll just wrap up here quick. So if Marcus and Brendan, if you have websites, I know some folks inquired about maybe websites to kind of learn more about what y'all are working on, keep up to date with books, list events, when and where you might be performing. If you want to throw those in the chat as I'm wrapping up here, we would love that so people can stay connected with you. And I just want to say, of course, thank you to Brendan and Marcus for their conversation this evening, and to Rebecca for moderating. We had a wealth of wonderful questions, and this was such an engaging conversation. So I want to say thank you to our wonderful audience for attending, for asking such great questions. We really appreciate your time and engagement. At the conclusion of this event, those of you who registered with an email address will receive a brief survey to complete. We would greatly appreciate you completing this survey to hear your feedback on the program, and thank you for putting it in the chat as we go here. I see lots of thank yous. This was awesome. Everyone is super appreciative from having heard from Marcus and Brendan tonight. Please visit our website at www.nchumanities.org to learn more about other upcoming events, and subscribe to our email newsletter to stay up to date with all NC Humanities news and programs. Our last 2024, I can't believe I'm saying that, North Carolina Reads virtual book conversation will be Wednesday, June 26th at 6:00 p.m. on Zoom webinar. We will discuss our June selection, Welcome to the Circus of Baseball, with author Ryan McGee and Dr. Nicholas Pizzelli, and maybe tune in for a special guest appearance by someone from the Asheville Tourist. So that'll be a lot of fun. Again, thank you everyone for attending this evening. Have a great night. Thanks.